All right, so hello everyone. My name's Corey Button, and as it says on the screen, I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian here at UMA. Today's workshop is called Citations Demystified. If at any point you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or put the question in the chat. I'm happy to answer it. I am getting pretty good at monitoring the chat while also presenting. So I think we'll be okay. And I'll see your question. But feel free to unmute yourself as well. Okay, so our agenda for today is we're going to talk about kind of the why, when, and how of citations. This is meant to help you feel just a little more confident in knowing when to cite something. And we're not going to go into like this finite details of formatting all of your citations for different styles, but we are going to go over how these styles might differ from each other in their formatting, and I'll have some examples of citations in different styles for you. And we'll also go over some resources that can help you with those sort of more detailed elements of creating citations. And just a little FYI, all the images in this presentation were created using a generative AI image tool called Adobe Firefly. So they're all sort of custom images for this presentation. And this is our agenda today, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end as well. So just the check-in poll that I'm going to launch is just to sort of see how you're all feeling about citations. So let me go to my polls. So just curious how you all feel about, what is the most difficult aspect of citations? So, maybe not every answer is available in the poll, but just to sort of gauge some things that we all struggle with. So I see some results coming in here in the poll. Okay. I'm going to give it 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, okay, so it looks like, folks struggle with the formatting. It is super specific formatting. Can you all see the results right now? Maybe now you can see them? Great. So yeah, formatting can be tricky. Even I, and I teach citations like I'm doing right now. I still struggle sometimes with formatting, like when a period, it should be a period or a comma. Knowing when you need to cite something is also quite tricky in certain situations. And everything, yeah, so some of us struggle with everything about citations, which is absolutely understandable. Okay, thank you for engaging in that poll. So let's talk about citation styles. And so I have this image here of sort of like a runway show, style. But citation styles. Oh, Mary, did you have a question?
No, I was just going to move all of you down because where I have all of you, it's kind of blocking, so I can't read everything.
Oh,
so
I see.
think I'm going to try to move everyone over here.
And yeah, you should be able to minimize the video as well if that works for you. But yeah. I
think this is better, but I may have to move again depending on where your where the reading is.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
The joys of Zoom.
I know.
Yeah. Okay, so citation style. So when I say style, I mean like MLA, APA, Chicago. Those are different style citations. And they kind of determine a few different things about the paper or project that you're turning in for an assignment. So one is that style determines the formatting of your paper overall. So things like how big your margins are in the paper, what type of font you can use, how you indent and space paragraphs and lines, whether or not you have page numbers. So all of those details are determined by the style that you're using. Citation style also determines how you structure your citation. So both in text and end of your paper citations are formatted differently depending on the style that you're using. Citations can also, the styles sometimes have a guidance on like what your writing style should be, or what type of sources you're allowed to consult. Sometimes they determine those things. It really depends on the style. And that often doesn't quite come up for you when you're in school. That's more, quite often more around like if you're going to publish something in a certain journal. But some instructors that you encounter at UMA might really want you to adhere fully to the style and do a certain writing style or certain sources that you're allowed to cite. So it kind of depends, but hopefully your instructor can provide guidance for that. Okay. So we're going to talk about these three different styles, MLA, APA, and Chicago, just because I feel like those come up the most often in courses. They're certainly not the only ones. There's ASA, there's IEEE, there's just a lot of different citation styles that you might encounter while you're at UMA. We do have guidance on those styles, and guidance is in the works or available on other websites that I can point you to as well for those other styles. But so each of these styles tend to be used in specific disciplines. So as you can see, MLA covers liberal arts, foreign languages, humanities. APA is typically used for psychology, sociology, education, and library and information science. Chicago is often used for literature, journalism, history, and art history. So you may have noticed, in your English classes, you're being asked to use MLA, but in your psychology class, you're being asked to use APA. And sometimes it can be like, oh my gosh, like which one is which? So it's really important to sort of look for guidance on how to cite these things to make sure that you're doing them correctly. So in the chat, I'm curious, and it looks like Nicholas, you've already sort of answered this question, but which citation style do you use the most in school? I'm curious. Veronica says Chicago is my go-to. We got APA normally. Some Chicago, some MLA, some APA. Great. So we're getting a really good mix of familiarity. Nicholas also says, I'm just into an intro course teaching MLA at the moment, and I'm in mental health and human services. So APA, so yeah, you're using sort of a combination of citation styles. I also tend to use Chicago most often, but also APA. But I tend to work with students who are using MLA the most. So I also am sort of using a lot of different styles at once. Okay, so why do we cite? These are not the only reasons I think that we are required to cite, but I think that there are three important reasons. So, and we're going to briefly go over each of these in the next few slides. So one is that giving credit to the original author is important. So we kind of live in a culture of credit, giving credit to people. And citing is a practice you'll take with you beyond your time at UMA, though it might look a little bit different depending on what you end up doing after you graduate. Citing also helps readers locate and verify your sources, and not in a way that's like, I mean, maybe sometimes in a way where they're like, are they using good sources, but also just to read more about what you're writing about because it's interesting to them. So you're helping them find more sources on a topic. You're setting them up to be able to explore the topic further. Citing also shows how smart you are. So it shows that you've consulted credible sources, you understood the sources that you interacted with, and you're contributing your own thoughts to that as well. And this basically it's just sort of showing that you're becoming part of the scholarly conversation, or what we call the scholarly conversation, which we'll talk more about in just a moment. So giving credit to an author is important even outside of academia. So I'm just going to show you some real world examples of issues around plagiarism. So this can happen in art and music. So there was a lawsuit against Nicki Minaj for using portions of a song by another artist named Tracy Chapman. So part of her song was sampled or covered by Nicki Minaj. She didn't have the rights to do that. She didn't seek permission, and she was sued and lost and had to like take down the song and pay a lot of money. So it can have sort of legal repercussions sometimes if you're not giving credit or asking for permission to use something. There's the office trope, of a boss sort of taking someone's ideas and getting credit for it. And that can lead to financial issues for a person. If someone else is taking credit for another person's work, that can affect their work life and their ability to succeed. There have been lots of political scandals around plagiarism in speeches. So even President Biden, way back in 1987, had a plagiarism scandal, which, according to this Washington Post article, is still an issue for him. It still comes up sometimes. And Melania Trump also was accused of plagiarizing a speech by Michelle Obama. And these ended up being really embarrassing moments for people. And then even now, as we sort of enter into artificial intelligence being used, there are some plagiarism issues that are coming up around that. And here we have a screenshot of an article that's talking about visual plagiarism. So we've got film stills from the movie Dune and an AI created version of it right next to it that was created without permission or the, really properly utilizing that imagery. So it's something that comes up in different ways in the real world for sure. So the second point, citing helps readers locate and verify your sources. So citations are kind of like a map in your paper. So here we have a screenshot of a paper that was written in Chicago style, and we can see we have these little footnotes that then correspond to a citation. So a person can say, oh, okay, this comes from this specific source. And then they can then trace it to the bibliography and find more information on a source. So you're really providing sort of those breadcrumbs for someone to be able to locate the sources that you're consulting. So I mentioned the scholarly conversation, and this is kind of a visual representation. And when you're citing things and writing your papers, you're sort of contributing to the scholarly conversation. And citations are definitely a part of that. So, and this is really what research is all about within college and even outside of it. So basically what this sort of cycle looks like is, someone does some research, they've have an idea for maybe a gap in knowledge in some way. And so they do some research. They submit it to, this is sort of for peer review. They submit it to a publication, which evaluates it and says, okay, this is good to publish. It goes out into the world. It's disseminated through libraries. So like our library databases, it's preserved, which we don't need to worry about right now. And then other folks read it. And then it maybe gives them ideas about further research or further analysis or an opinion on what they're reading. And so they're going to do some research and cite what they are learning about the topic and then submit their own ideas on it. And then the cycle continues. So we're constantly building knowledge together. And that I should have said, if I go back to our, oops. So I have this image here of students sort of building something together because that's what citations do. They help us build sort of a wealth of knowledge between everyone. Oops, now we're going to go through all this again. Okay. So let's talk about when to cite, which I know can feel tricky sometimes. So this is just some general guidance, and some moments it's easier to know when you need to cite something than others. So things like direct quotations, if you're quoting directly from something, you're going to need to cite it. Paraphrasing it is also a pretty clear moment when you want to cite something. If you're summarizing a source, oh, thank you. Sorry, I didn't see your question. Yeah, thanks, Veronica. When you're using someone else's idea or theory, you'll want to cite that. Facts that are not common knowledge. Also, if you're using visuals or media, so like a graph or a chart or an image that you're analyzing, that will also need a citation. So these are some general moments of when you might need to cite something. And I'm curious, and you can either put in the chat or unmute yourself. Can anyone here think of a time when you didn't know if you should cite something or not? And what was that like for you?
I've been there before. Um, I took a class in my first degree
Hmm.
called Martin and Malcolm, and it was really hard trying to cite an autobiography and
Mm,
not using their own words for their experience and trying to come up with my own words to
mm,
explain their experience. And so what I do is I use note cards for my little ideas, and then I formulate paragraphs on those note cards. Like I do the translation, so I kind of take what I read in the paragraph and then I put it through the Nicholas translator, right? And I put whatever Nicholas translator came up with on the note cards, which makes it easier for when I have to use my voice to text
hmm
device for my issues, and
hmm
and it pulls out a whole paper right away, just like that.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, so it sounds like you've got a pretty good system. Yeah, I think some of what you're referring to maybe was paraphrasing, like we struggle with, like, how do I um, paraphrase this or summarize this in my own words? And I really feel like that's something that the more you do this, the more you write, the more you're required to use sources and write papers and things like that. The easier it kind of can become for you. It's just all takes practice.
Writer's
Um,
block is my challenge, getting
yeah.
started sometimes and then having, see, where I'm at right now is this author or this author. And if I know too much about this author, I get bogged down. If I don't know too much about the other one, I get bogged down as well. So
Mm,
overwhelming of information sometimes stops me from being able to seek out the facts, or it kind of um presents a barrier for paraphrasing, if you will, because you're overwhelmed by so much information.
yeah. Yeah. And I think that comes up a lot for folks. And you can always reach out to a librarian or, yeah, your professor for guidance on getting a little bit more focus on what you want to research for your assignment. So, yeah, that's a great point.
I know
And
one struggle that I have that I
yeah.
noticed that I've had is how much information can I cite? Because sometimes like I would like to use like a little short story,
Hmm.
like, but sometimes it may take a whole 2 page trying to, but it's hard to iterate it because it's not a story that is mine or I can iterate, it's somebody else's um story, so
Hmm.
sometimes I struggle with that, like how much can I share, can I share the whole thing, is that too much, like, so there's just the information stuff, and then paraphrasing I don't even try to do because I for some reason I when I paraphrase I seem to get called out on plagiarism, and I'm like, that's not what I was trying to do, but okay, I can see
Yeah.
it, but I don't even try to even go in that space there.
Yeah, I get that. That can be tricky, like knowing how much of a source is too much over reliance on something, or just, how do you take, yeah, like you said, something like a short story that's sort of singular and short and not, um, if you're writing a whole paper on it, can be tricky. And I think finding a balance of resources can be helpful. And with paraphrasing, sometimes I think about it and summarizing too, and we'll look at actual examples of paraphrasing and quoting and summarizing. Sometimes a helpful exercise for me is to, if I'm reading something and I'm trying to paraphrase or summarize it, I pretend like I'm explaining it to a friend. And that sometimes helps me kind of figure out, oh, like, oh yeah, I can say this in my own words. And okay, so let's move on. Thank you all for sharing that. That was great. And I appreciate you sharing your experiences. So now we're going to kind of go into some examples of these things. So quoting, and like I said, you know, quoting sometimes can feel pretty natural in terms of like, I know I need to cite this. But when you're using quotes in your work, you're usually using it for very specific instances because typically paraphrasing and summarizing is a better use of citations than quoting. You don't want to like quote, 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 quote in a paper because you're kind of, it's kind of viewed as an over-reliance on a source and you're not contributing as much of your own thinking and ideas to the work if you're just quoting, you know, a ton from different sources. So quoting is effective when you're using things like statistical data, providing textual evidence from a poem or literature, or providing a unique definition or perspective. So here's an example in MLA, and this is an actual report that the Wabanaki Alliance created with a bunch of other institutions around, including Wabanaki studies in K through 12 curriculum. And so it says, the lack of Wabanaki studies taking place in Maine schools is not without a solution. Recommendations for more meaningful and comprehensive inclusion of Wabanaki studies includes, quote, reinstating the Wabanaki Studies Commission to work with the Department of Education to create a model curriculum, end quote. So
I
there are
have
a
a
few,
question. I know this
yeah,
might be a silly question, but I don't believe in those. So
yeah,
why
I don't either, no, silly question.
why are the brackets like that? I've been trying to I'm trying to have fun with brackets, but why did they use the brackets like that? Because if I put my thumb over it says reinstat. So is that
Right.
the word that they used and then they used their brackets to fix the word?
Yeah, excellent question, and thank you for bringing that up. So you use brackets when you're changing the tense of a word or maybe a conjugation of the word in order for the quote to make sense within your sentence. And I created this example specifically for that reason, so you could see that what that looks like. So this is originally said reinstate the Wabanaki Studies Commission. But that wouldn't work with the tense. I hope I'm using tense right. Maybe I'm not even using the word tense correctly, but it wouldn't work with the flow of the sentence that I wrote. So what the bracket is telling you is that you altered the quote a little bit in order to make sense.
Okay,
But
cool.
you want to watch out. Yeah, thank you for asking that. The thing about brackets though is when you're quoting something, you should not use them to change the original meaning of what you're quoting. You're really just trying to make it make grammatical sense. You don't want to use it to change the meaning. Oh, thanks, Diane. Oh yeah, I put Wabanaki. My mistake. We all make mistakes. It's okay, but thank you for pointing that out. I'll fix that for the future. And thank you also for pointing to the citation. So this is an example of an in-text citation. We're including the author of the quote. In this case, the author is an organization. It's not a person because the report author is listed as Wabanaki Alliance. So that would be an example of an MLA quote. And let's look at one more quote. So this would be an example. This is also MLA. And this is when you're using a quote to analyze a piece of literature, in this case, a poem. So it says, in the prose poem, The Threads of Odyssey, Momaday concludes with these two lines, quote, migration. It is a word that lies in my brain like a leaf. It wrestles and turns and it spins like a weaver's wheel, the threads of Odyssey, end quote. And then you see we have immediately after the quote, the line in which that appears in the poem. And then the author then further analyzes the quote. It is no wonder then that in Again the Far Morning, Momaday spins the threads of his own odyssey through his personal and ancestral past. So this is an excellent use of a quote. I just took this from an actual journal article. So a professional wrote this. So they are providing the quote, which is essential to their analysis that the author is then providing. So they're providing their own thought and interpretation of that line in the poem. Okay. So now we're going to move into paraphrasing. So to paraphrase means to explain a source in your own words while still giving credit to the author for their thoughts. So here we have an APA example of the same example that we used for the quote, but this is what it might look like to paraphrase. So it says, in their response to the Wabanaki Studies Law Report, the Wabanaki Alliance, parentheses 2022, provides a list of recommendations for schools to implement to increase accountability in teaching Wabanaki history and culture. One initiative that is advocated is to reinstate the Wabanaki Studies Commission. So going back to our quote, we have the actual quote, reinstating the Wabanaki Studies Commission to work with the Department of Education to create a model curriculum. So this is a paraphrase of that idea. So we're taking the idea or concept or point that the reporter is making, but just putting it in our own words with our own sort of context around that. Another thing to point out is this is an APA example. So rather than having the page number, we have the publication year. And so that's a key difference with in-text citations with APA versus MLA. MLA is usually the author and page number. APA is usually the author and year. And you'll notice that I already say who the author is in the flow of the sentence. So I don't then need to put it in the in-text citation because it's already, the information's already there. Not everyone likes MLA. We all have our preferred citation formats, I think, or styles. Okay, so here's another paraphrasing example. The largest climate change threats to tourism destinations relate to loss of visitors through disappearing attractions, seasonal inaccessibility, or changes in visitor markets requiring different tourism structures and product offerings. So here's an example, also in APA. I don't think that comma is supposed to be there. Again, my apologies. I said I struggle with these things too. So here's an example. But here we can see that we don't mention the author in the flow of the sentence. So they are listed here. This is an example of when you have two authors in APA style. So we have the ampersand, Lou and Cheer, and then we have the publication date. So again, we're communicating an idea or concept that these authors put forward, but just putting it in our own words, but still citing them as if, you know, we're essentially quoting their idea, but in our own words. So we would still want to cite that directly. Okay, so now summarizing. Summarizing comes in when we are trying to give a general overview of an article, a book, or maybe even a topic in general. So it's a wider, you're sort of zooming out a little bit when you're summarizing something. So in this example, it says passed in 2001, the Wabanaki Studies Law LD 291 requires K-12 schools in Maine to teach Wabanaki territories, cultural practices, economic systems, and more. Since its passing, schools have largely failed to meaningfully incorporate Wabanaki studies into their curriculums. So this is summarizing essentially the entire report. Again, in the author's own words, but summarizing all of the sort of key concepts that are communicated in this several pages long report. So we're not taking just one specific element and paraphrasing it, we're summarizing the whole thing. And here's an example too, where there's multiple authors of this report, hence the et al. Again, this is an example of there's no specific person who's listed as the author. It's a series of organizations. The Abbey Museum, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, starts with A, so it came first. So that's who we cite in the in-text citation, and then add the et al, which indicates and others. There are other authors, multiple authors of this report. Okay, and then one more summarizing example. Orban, and this is APA, Orban and, oh gosh, why did I include a last name I knew I couldn't pronounce in my example? That was silly. Anyway, Orban and Przybylski 2019, so year of publication of the source, determined that half of the participants in recent studies overestimated how much time they spend on the internet, and a quarter of the participants underestimate it. So this is giving the full conclusion of an entire study that was written about in an academic article by these two authors. So again, this is APA. We're giving the author names in the flow of the sentence, and then the publication year, and then the full conclusion of this particular study. Okay. Any questions about anything I just covered in all these examples? Great. Okay, so let's move on to just in-text citations in journals. So we've seen a lot of examples of in-text citations. So we'll just talk about them a little bit in more detail. So they go at the end of a sentence that incorporates a source or sources. Sometimes they go immediately if you're quoting something sort of mid-sentence, or like we just saw in that example, we're referencing the article sort of mid-sentence. You might include the in-text citation in the middle of the sentence or at the end of it. It just sort of depends on how you're using it. In-text citations typically include the author last name and the page number of the source where you're getting your information. That's an MLA, or the year of the publication like we saw in APA. So in Chicago, and we'll see a few more Chicago examples, and we saw one in that sort of screenshot where I was talking about how citations are like a roadmap. So those appear as footnotes or endnotes, and they have some specific formatting requirements. They have sort of full footnotes and followed by shortened versions of the footnote if you're citing something multiple times. So in general, I've noticed that we tend to get a little tripped up when some information that we think is supposed to be there isn't there. For example, if there's no page number, that's okay. It happens a lot, and there's guidance around what to do in that in those situations. So depending on the source, if there's no page numbers, like if it's a website, you don't need to list it. It's okay. Same with author. Sometimes, as we saw, sometimes an author is an organization or a corporation, not a person. That's totally fine. You can still list them as the author. Sometimes we have no idea who wrote something. You know, maybe you're looking at primary source materials where you're looking at like a photograph from the 1800s, and we don't know who took the photograph. That's okay. There's lots of guidance around what to do in those situations, and you can consult some of the sources that I'm going to recommend to you, or you can look it up with what to do. But these things come up, and it doesn't mean that you can't use the source. It just means you have to cite it in a different way. And the more you sort of encounter these scenarios, the more you'll just be like, oh yeah, okay, I know I don't need a page number. It's okay. Okay, and so then at the end of your paper, you have either your references list, your bibliography, or your works cited list. And all of these are the same sort of general concept, but they all have different names depending on the style. So like we said, style really determines a lot of the details of your paper. So if you're working in APA, you're going to list references at the end of your paper. If you're working in Chicago, in notes bibliography style, you're going to say bibliography. If you're working in MLA, it's going to say works cited, but they're all the same thing. They're all the list of all of the sources that you consulted in your paper. So they're going to go at the end of your paper. They all ask that you list your sources in alphabetical order by author last name. And again, if you consulted something that didn't have an author and it was instead an organization, you would still treat that as a last name. So again, we saw Abbey Museum, that would go with the A's in my list of references. So I always recommend, you know, don't work, what do they say? I almost said work harder, not smarter. It is the opposite, work smarter, not harder. So take advantage of citation generators. We have a lot of tools even built into the library databases that will generate the works cited or bibliography references citation for you. And you will want to double check. Sometimes they make errors, just like you saw I did in some of my examples. You know, sometimes there might be no author in the citation that's generated, even though clearly you can see there's an author in the article that you're citing. So always double check, make sure everything's there that needs to be there. And then those citation generators are not going to format your citations for you. So we're going to look at some examples of formatted reference lists, and you'll notice that some are double spaced, some are you have to indent. Citation generators are not going to do that work for you. So that is something that you will still have to do when you're building out your reference list at the end of your paper. Okay, so here's an example, and I got some of my slides come from this citation website called Scribr, which I love, and I'll link to it for you. They have some really excellent guidance. So this is from them, and this is an example of a works cited entry. And so you'll see these are 3 different types of sources in MLA format. Does anyone want to make a guess of what type of source each of these are? What sort of content type they are?
When you say context, do you mean like if it's a book or
Yes.
So
Yep.
the first one looks like an article of some sort. The second one is probably like another article. I guess I would say, I don't know. Well, I don't know. The second one has pages, so that may be a book of some sort. Have like, and I would say the last one's probably like an article of some sort. I don't know. It's interesting to look at it from this perspective.
Yeah. I mean, this is a tricky question for sure. I'm definitely
Can I try?
challenging you. Yeah, go for it.
I think the first one's a journal. No, the second one's a journal. I think the first one, it might be something peer reviewed.
Okay, so you think it may
And
be
then
an
I think,
article?
yeah, and then, well, I think I know the Rolling Stone one's an article,
Mm-hmm.
and I know it was used from website, which is Bob Dylan deserves his Nobel Prize.
Yeah. Okay, any other guesses? I can reveal the answers otherwise. Chat. Okay, so you all did pretty good. So yeah, this is the website. We can see the URL rollingstone.com. This other one, this is a journal article, and there are a few things that indicate that. So I'm looking at volume number, issue number. So those are typically used for journals because they're published in different issues, which are contained in different volumes. And we have specific page numbers. So this article probably appeared in pages 257 through 276 within a journal. And this first one is actually a book. And there are a few things that sort of indicate that to me. The first is that the title is all in italics. And then we have a publisher and then the date. So we're not getting page numbers. You'll notice here, this article title is in quotations because it's part of a larger whole. So typically, especially in MLA, if something is part of a larger whole, so an article within an entire journal, it's going to have quotations, and then the name of the journal is going to be in italics. In this case, the whole is the book. So the whole book is being cited. So we have the title in italics. So don't expect you to know that off the top of your head, and you don't need to ever like learn these things by nature. You might, just the more you cite, they might become more familiar, but it's just to see what you all thought. And you'll notice, so in this example, all the authors are in green, the titles are in yellow, and then we have some other details. So dates are here, and then we have like a publisher, and then in this case, a journal title. So these are all different elements that are appearing in your works cited entries in MLA. And we'll see how that looks in an APA format in just a moment. But just to also show you what a formatting might look like for your works cited list in MLA, So here again, you can see we've got works cited just right at the top center. You have your name and the page number. So these are all important elements of MLA. So all of those details have to get worked into your works cited list. You'll notice too that all of your citations are going to be double spaced. And the first line of your citation is going to align, with your 1-inch margins. But any additional lines within the citation are indented. And those are indented 5 spaces for the line, or 1 tab. And you'll see, the 1-inch margins are part of it. So that is sort of the general formatting style for MLA. Okay, so now let's look at APA. So here's an example of a references list in APA. Again, we have some of similar colors happening here, and I apologize. I don't typically like to use color to indicate information, but I didn't make these slides, so here we are. So we see the authors are in green, titles are in yellow, we have dates in blue, and then sort of location or journal titles in orange. And again, we have the same types of sources. So this first source is a book. The second one is a journal article in a scholarly journal. And then this is a website. And you can see the elements are slightly different than MLA. So looking back at MLA, here we have the MLA works cited entry, and then here is the APA. Does anyone notice anything immediately that's like, oh, that's for sure different than MLA?
The dates are more prominent right at the beginning to let you know how current the information is.
Yeah, that's a key difference in APA, and you'll notice too that they're in parentheses, which is not a part of MLA. And then I think that's actually the main difference here. Again, these are still in alphabetical order by author last name. We still need to have things like the journal title, although you notice here too, the volume and issue number is formatted very differently from MLA. So here we have the volume number just in italics and the issue number in parentheses with no, again, going back to MLA, here it's completely different. We have VOL period 4 and O period 2 to indicate volume and issue number. So different. Small details, that's what citations are all about.
And also APA, you can just like copy the the author's name and then the is it the year, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you use that for like if you're citing, right? If you're going to cite versus MLA, you kind of have to like look for it a little bit more. That was one thing I noticed about MLA and APA style. It was just more easier and convenient.
Yeah, that's a really good observation, Alicia. And like, a really good sort of quick hack that you can kind of do to like find all the sources. That's awesome. Okay. Oh, sorry. Did we look at, whoa. Okay. And so here is our references page at the end of our APA paper. So you'll notice, again, this does not say works cited, it says references, and it's in bold, but still in the top center. We have a page number, but you don't put your last name. But you'll see this is also double spaced, and we also indent additional lines, and we also list by author last name in alphabetical order. So again, slight differences, but general concept is the same for APA. Okay, and now we're going to look at Chicago. So for Chicago, it says bibliography in the center, not references, not works cited. So another big difference with Chicago is you'll notice we are not double spacing. We're still indenting additional lines, but no double spacing in our references, or sorry, in our bibliography list in Chicago. A Chicago paper, the content of your paper though, is double spaced. So it's only your bibliography that's single spaced. So a couple key differences, but here again, we can see we've got the author right up front. We've got title, and then that additional information. You'll notice in Chicago, we've got the publisher, city and the publisher name. That's an addition in this. And then we've got some other sort of differences around like accessing websites and things like that. And again, like we could really get into the weeds around how to format all of these different types of sources. But I don't want to make anyone fall asleep here. And also this would be like a 4-hour long presentation. So if you're curious about those like really small formatting differences, again, I'm going to show you a lot of sources that you can utilize, and you can also just reach out to a librarian. We're super happy to help you with these things. So you can, and also the Writing Center and Vault are great resources as well. And so here again, we see some formatting for your bibliography page. We've still got the indents. This is single space, but we put an additional space between each entry. So lots of small details to pay attention to when you're building this out. Okay, so another key part of citations and citing is keeping track of all of the sources that you're consulting and knowing where you got your information from as you're writing your paper. I find this to be quite difficult. And I always end up being like, oh my gosh, I know I read that somewhere. Which source did I read that thing? I'm trying to cite it. And so these are some tools that you can utilize to sort of prevent some of that, you know, minor panic when you can't remember where you found certain information as you're writing a paper. So if you are just like really, you know, prefer something that's not super fancy and you don't want to like download software or anything like that, I do have a spreadsheet that's fairly basic, but it can be really helpful for you to track your sources. And I'm going to give you the link to this. When you click the link to it, it's going to prompt you to make your own copy just so that you're not adding your own sources into a shared document. But this is just an example line up top so you can keep track of the title, author, you know, all that crucial citation information, even the URL of where you got the source. And then you can add a quote from that you might want to use later. And you can take notes like, oh, I think this would be helpful for this particular element of my paper. And then you can even use, you know, one of those citation generator tools to copy and paste the citation just right into the spreadsheet. So this can be a really great way to keep track of like, oh, I want to use this here. Maybe this is a good quote, and why you might why you ever read the source and wanted to use it, you know, when you're like 3 weeks later trying to remember what the deal was with that specific source, you can kind of keep track of it here. But there are also just some really incredible, really robust tools out there to help you keep track of citations, generate citations, even have your, you know, bibliography or references list generated for you. So Zotero is a great tool. And I should mention too, so Veronica is our sort of citation management go-to librarian because she knows a lot about all these different tools. So if you're ever curious and want to sample some of those, definitely reach out to her. But Zotero is a free tool. You can download it onto your computer and sort of incorporate it into your web browser. And this is just sort of an example of what an extremely full Zotero account might look like. So you can create folders for different assignments or papers that you're writing. You can essentially, when you are looking at a source, Zotero allows you to save that source and it sort of pulls it into this sort of tool. So you don't have to copy and paste anything. You just like click a button and it adds it to this list, and you can kind of organize the list however it works for you. You can add notes to your sources. So again, just keeping track of like the why you might use the source, or adding potential quotes you might want to use. So, and you can also do a lot of, like, you can share, if you were working with a partner on a project, you can share a citation list with them and build it together. So very robust tool that, you know, we're happy to talk more about if you're interested in that. And then RefWorks is a similar tool, excuse me. So we provide access to RefWorks through the library. So you'll notice when you are in the library doing a search, I guess I can just show you what that might look like. So you'll notice as it loads, we have all these bookmarks. So those are actually ref works. And if you want to make an account with them, it will save these sources into your RefWorks. So as I'm saving these, if I were logged into my RefWorks, they would then start populating here on this page. And I again can, create folders for different assignments and do all those cool things. Yeah, Veronica.
Oh, so I just wanted to mention, if I can, the save button only reroutes it to your RefWorks if you're signed in first.
Yes.
So an important step, because if you're not signed in, it's just a temporary folder and will go away if you close your browser.
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, so I'm not signed into my RefWorks, so you'll notice these like enhancing cardiac rehabilitation. I saved that, but it's not here because I'm not signed in. And when I close this browser, gone. I'll never get these articles again. So that's a key part of RefWorks. You do have to sign up for it. Same with Zotero, you have to sign up for it. But they're, really easy to sign up for. They don't, send you a bunch of emails or anything. It's really just you have the account to log into so that you can keep track of your sources and continue to access them. So those are just, yes, thank you, Veronica. Those are just a really brief intro to some of the tools that are available to you. And then some other websites that I recommend, again, when you're like, does the period go here? Or how do I do the volume or issue number? I don't remember. These are sort of my go-to sources. There are so many out there. And I actually have a handout that lists all of these. So I'm going to give that to you now. So this is going to have a list of all of these sources and links to these sources so that you can access them. And it also has the library contact information and my contact information. So you're welcome to access that. So we have our own writing and research lab. So this is called the OWL. And so you'll notice on this website, it's also linked from the library homepage and in that handout I just gave you. But we have citation help for APA, ASA, Chicago, and MLA. And I did forget to mention, which it was in my notes and I apologize, but Chicago is particular in that it has two different sort of sub styles. So we were looking at notes and bibliography styles, but there is also author date styles. So just be aware, your author date is more for social sciences and things like that. So always double check, but this has some guidance on when to use author date versus notes bibliography. So we have lots of citation help. And this was created by the library along with the writing centers in the vault. So by and for UMA folks. So I encourage you to check that out. And then again, the Scribber knowledge base is amazing. They have writing tips for a bunch of different styles. I will say, they're a private company and they provide paid services. So you might notice like, get your paper evaluated by a professional, so there are little like moments of someone trying to sell you something in Scribber. So just to be aware of that. Excelsior OWL is another amazing resource. They have writing help as well as citation and documentation help. And this is like an open educational resource. So it's all free. And they provide a lot of really helpful guidance. So you can see they've got APA, MLA in Chicago here. So those are my top recommendations. There are a bunch of others. It's just a matter of figuring out what works for you, what your preference is. And again, the more you do this, the more natural it feels for you. So I know we don't have a ton of time left. I apologize, but does anyone have any lingering questions or thoughts about anything we covered today?
I do,
Yeah, Mary.
Lori. With the sample spreadsheet, are you going to email that? Can you email that to us, or how do we obtain that?
Yeah, I think, is it in? Yeah, so this template for keeping track of resources link, that's in there for you, but let me just put it in the chat for you as well.
Okay,
And again, that's going to prompt you to make your own copy, but then you'll have your own that you can then make, any number of copies you want to make for your own use.
okay.
Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts?
Just got to say goodbye because I have to go to my next meeting, but thank you very much. It was very helpful. I'll probably lose a lot of it until I ever have to do another citation again. But I thought it would be good to refresh my memory because I haven't done it in quite a while. So thank you. Very well presented, very helpful.
Thank you. Thanks,
Yes.
Diane. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Veronica, for helping in the chat. I really appreciate it. And yeah, just feel free to reach out. Any questions you have, we're here for you. And you got this.
Okay, all right. Thanks a lot. All right.
Yeah. See ya.
Okay, bye.
Bye.